Before you open this case file, I have a challenge for you. Stay with me until the very end of this investigation, because once every piece of evidence has been presented, you'll have one question to answer. Could you have prevented one of the largest data breaches in history? At the end of this investigation, you'll be invited to step into the role of the lead investigator through the official Case Zero investigation file, where you'll analyze evidence, timelines, security logs, emails, and forensic clues to determine whether you can solve the case yourself. And for those who want to investigate beyond this documentary, the Case Zero Deep Dive Analysis book uncovers every technical detail, executive decision, and cybersecurity lesson that couldn't fit into a single video. But before you can solve this case, you need to understand the crime. Case File 004. Target: Equifax. Industry: credit reporting. Threat type: data breach. Impact: personal information of nearly half the U.S. population exposed. The investigation begins. Now, for most people, Equifax wasn't a company they chose. It wasn't a social media platform. It wasn't an online store. Many people had never even visited its website. Yet Equifax knew almost everything about them. Their names, addresses, dates of birth, social security numbers, driver's license information, financial history, credit cards, loans, mortgages, employment records. The company collected information most people would never willingly hand over, because collecting personal financial data was its business. Equifax was one of America's 3 major credit reporting agencies. Banks relied on it. Insurance companies relied on it. Employers relied on it. Mortgage lenders relied on it. Governments relied on it. Millions of financial decisions were made every single day using information stored inside Equifax systems. To many organizations, Equifax wasn't just another company. It was part of the financial infrastructure itself, which made one question almost unthinkable. What if someone broke in? Not for an hour, not for a day, but for months, without anyone noticing. Every investigation starts with identifying the target. By 2017, Equifax had become one of the largest repositories of personal information in the world. Its databases contained records on hundreds of millions of people, not only Americans, but individuals in multiple countries. Unlike passwords, you can change a password. Unlike a credit card, you can cancel a credit card, but you cannot change your birthday. You cannot change where you were born. You cannot change your social security number overnight. When this type of information is stolen, the consequences can last for decades. Identity theft, fraud, loan applications, tax scams, synthetic identities. Once exposed, personal information continues, creating opportunities for criminals long after the original breach. Investigators would later conclude something chilling. The attackers hadn't selected their victim randomly. They had selected one of the richest collections of personal information on Earth. This wasn't merely a database. It was a vault, and someone had already begun looking for the key. Every cyber attack begins somewhere. Sometimes, it begins with sophisticated malware. Sometimes, a phishing email. Sometimes, a stolen password. This investigation began with something much smaller, a software vulnerability. In March 2017, cybersecurity researchers publicly disclosed a critical vulnerability affecting Apache Struts. Apache Struts is an open-source web application framework used by organizations worldwide. Developers depend on it to build web-based systems. When the vulnerability became public, security experts immediately understood its severity. Attackers could potentially execute commands remotely on vulnerable servers. No physical access required. No stolen credentials required. Only an internet connection. The vulnerability received a severity score that placed it among the most dangerous software flaws. Security advisories were published. Emergency warnings were distributed. Software updates became available. Organizations around the world rushed to patch vulnerable systems. Time had suddenly become the most valuable resource. Because cybersecurity works like a race. Security teams race to install updates. Attackers race to exploit systems before those updates are installed. Whoever wins changes history. Investigators would later discover that Equifax had entered that race. But something went terribly wrong. The warning had arrived. The patch existed. The vulnerability was known. Yet somewhere inside Equifax, one critical server remained exposed. No alarm sounded. No executive suspected what would happen next. But somewhere else, someone was already scanning the internet, searching, patiently, waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. And when they found it, Case File 004 truly began. Every successful investigation eventually uncovers the exact moment everything changed. For Equifax, it wasn't an advanced hacking tool. It wasn't artificial intelligence. It wasn't a nation-state cyber weapon. It was something far more ordinary. A missing software update. That single oversight became the doorway into one of the largest identity theft operations ever discovered. The attackers wasted no time. Within days of the vulnerability becoming public, internet-wide scans began. Automated systems searched millions of websites looking for servers that remained vulnerable. Every unpatched server represented an opportunity. Most organizations closed the door quickly. Equifax didn't. One public-facing web application remained exposed. From the outside, it looked completely normal. Customers continued accessing services. Employees continued working. Executives continued making decisions. No one inside the company realized that strangers had quietly crossed the perimeter. The attackers executed their first commands. No alarms. No flashing warning lights. No dramatic Hollywood hacking sequence. Only a few lines of code sent across the internet. Within seconds, they had a foothold. The investigation would later reveal something unsettling. Breaking in had been the easy part. Remaining undetected would become the real operation. Most people imagine hackers breaking into a company, stealing everything they can find, and leaving immediately. Professional attackers don't work that way. The best attackers move slowly. They observe. They learn. They map the environment. Investigators call this reconnaissance. Imagine entering a massive office building at night. Instead of stealing the first laptop you see, you quietly walk through every hallway. You read every door sign. You identify security cameras. You locate executive offices. You discover where the most valuable documents are stored. Only then do you begin the theft. That's exactly what happened inside Equifax. The attackers explored the internal network. They identified servers, databases, applications, administrative systems, connections between departments. Every new discovery expanded their understanding of the company's digital infrastructure. They weren't guessing anymore. They were navigating, like someone following a detailed map. Every organization stores valuable information, but attackers don't want everything. They want the information that's hardest to replace. At Equifax, that meant personal identities. Eventually, the attackers found what they had been searching for. Massive databases containing some of the most sensitive personal information imaginable. Names, birth dates, home addresses, social security numbers, driver's license information, email addresses, financial records, some credit card numbers. Information that millions of people trusted would remain protected. Investigators later estimated that approximately 147 million individuals were affected. Think about that number. Nearly half of the United States population. One breach, one company, millions of lives potentially affected. Identity theft isn't like losing money from a bank account. Banks can reimburse stolen funds. Credit cards can be canceled. Passwords can be reset. But personal identity follows you for life. The attackers understood that. They weren't stealing temporary information. They were stealing permanent identities. Each record represented future opportunities for fraud. Fake loans, fraudulent tax returns, synthetic identities, financial scams. The stolen information could continue generating value for criminals years after the original attack. And throughout all of this, Equifax continued operating normally. Customers visited the website. Businesses requested credit reports. Employees logged into their computers. No one realized that one of the largest collections of personal information in the world was quietly leaving the network. The attackers had accomplished something extraordinary. They hadn't smashed through the front door. They had walked through an unlocked entrance and spent weeks exploring the building without anyone noticing. But every investigation eventually reaches a turning point. Because no matter how careful attackers are, every operation leaves traces. The question wasn't whether evidence existed. The question was, Would anyone notice it before it was too late? The next piece of evidence would determine whether this breach remained a hidden intrusion or became an international cybersecurity crisis. Every successful cyber attack depends on one thing: time. The longer attackers remain undetected, the more dangerous they become. For Equifax, time became their greatest ally. Day after day, the attackers continued accessing internal systems. They weren't rushing. They weren't triggering alarms. They behaved like legitimate users, blending into normal network traffic. This technique is one of the reasons modern breaches are so difficult to detect. Attackers rarely smash through every security control. Instead, they become invisible. Investigators would later determine that the intrusion lasted for more than 2 months. More than 60 days. 60 days of exploration. 60 days of collecting sensitive information. 60 days during which millions of records quietly left the organization. Every single day the attackers remained inside. The damage grew. The tragedy wasn't simply that Equifax had been breached. The tragedy was that nobody realized it was happening. One of the first questions investigators asked was simple: didn't anyone notice? Surely a company responsible for protecting the identities of millions would have sophisticated monitoring systems. The answer was more complicated. Large organizations generate enormous amounts of security data every second. Login attempts, server requests, application logs, database queries, firewall alerts, authentication records, thousands, sometimes millions, of security events every single day. Finding one malicious activity inside that ocean of information is like searching for a single drop of ink in a swimming pool. But investigators discovered something even more concerning. Some security monitoring capabilities that should have helped detect suspicious activity were not fully effective during critical periods of the breach. This became one of the most heavily scrutinized aspects of the investigation. The technology existed. The warnings existed. Yet the attack continued. Cybersecurity experts often repeat a simple phrase: you cannot defend what you cannot see. Visibility is everything. Because an attacker you cannot detect is an attacker you cannot stop. Eventually, every hidden operation reaches an ending. In late July 2017, security personnel finally noticed suspicious activity involving one of Equifax web applications. What began as an unusual observation quickly escalated into a full-scale incident response. Investigators were called. Servers were isolated. Evidence was preserved. Forensic specialists began reconstructing what had happened. The deeper they looked, the worse the situation became. This wasn't a small intrusion. This wasn't limited to a handful of customer accounts. It wasn't dozens, or hundreds, or even thousands. Investigators realized they were looking at one of the largest breaches of personal information ever recorded. The scale was almost impossible to comprehend. Millions of identities exposed for weeks without public knowledge. The company had finally discovered the attackers. But discovering an attack doesn't erase the damage. The information had already been copied. The attackers were gone. The evidence remained. Now investigators faced a different challenge. Understanding exactly what had been taken. Finding a breach and announcing a breach are two different events. Organizations often require time to investigate, to verify evidence, to understand the scope, to notify regulators, to prepare customer communications. Equifax entered that difficult phase. Every hour mattered. Every decision would be examined. Every statement would be analyzed. Meanwhile, millions of people continued living their normal lives, applying for mortgages, opening bank accounts, using credit cards, completely unaware that some of their most sensitive personal information had already been stolen. Investigators now faced another question: not how the attackers got in, not what they stole, but how should one of the largest companies in America tell nearly half the country that their identities might no longer be private? The answer would become almost as controversial as the breach itself. Because the cyber attack wasn't over. The technical intrusion had ended. But the public crisis was only beginning. Every investigation eventually reaches the moment when the truth can no longer remain hidden. For Equifax, that moment arrived on September 7, 2017. The company publicly announced that it had suffered a massive cybersecurity incident. Almost immediately, news organizations interrupted regular programming. Financial analysts reacted. Government agencies demanded answers. Millions of people rushed online to discover whether they had become victims. Panic spread quickly. People weren't asking if their email address had been exposed. They weren't asking whether a password had been stolen. They were asking something far more frightening. Can someone steal my identity? Unlike many previous data breaches, this was an information people could simply replace. Your date of birth remains the same. Your social security number follows you for life. Your financial identity cannot simply be downloaded again. For millions of Americans, the breach represented a permanent loss of privacy. The consequences could last decades. Identity theft, fraudulent loans, fake tax returns, medical identity fraud. Criminals now possessed enough information to impersonate real people with alarming accuracy. And for many victims, the effects wouldn't appear immediately. Some would discover fraudulent activity months later. Others, years later. That is one of the most dangerous characteristics of identity theft. The attack ends. The consequences continue. As public outrage intensified, federal investigators joined the case. Congress demanded explanations. Regulators launched inquiries. Cybersecurity specialists began reconstructing the timeline. Every log, every server, every security decision, every email, everything became evidence. Investigators asked difficult questions. Why wasn't the vulnerability patched sooner? How long had the attackers remained inside? Why wasn't the intrusion detected earlier? Could the breach have been prevented? One by one, the answers emerged. The Apache Struts vulnerability had already been publicly disclosed. A security update had already been released. Warnings had already been distributed. The opportunity to prevent the breach had existed. Somewhere between the warning and the implementation, something failed. That realization transformed the investigation. This wasn't simply about sophisticated attackers. It was also about missed opportunities. Cybersecurity professionals often say that security is built from thousands of small decisions. One missed update, one forgotten server, one overlooked vulnerability. Sometimes, that's all an attacker needs. The financial consequences were enormous. Equifax faced lawsuits from consumers, investigations from regulators, loss of public trust, executive resignations, expensive legal settlements, years of remediation. The company ultimately agreed to settlements worth hundreds of millions of dollars related to the breach. But investigators understood something important. Money wasn't the biggest loss. Trust was. Credit reporting agencies exist because people trust them to safeguard sensitive information. Once that trust is broken, rebuilding it becomes one of the hardest challenges any organization can face. The breach became a case study taught in universities, analyzed by governments, referenced in boardrooms around the world. Not because attackers used revolutionary technology, but because one overlooked vulnerability helped expose nearly half a nation's personal identities. Data exposed names, social security numbers, dates of birth, addresses, driver's license information, financial records, other sensitive personal data. Estimated victims, approximately 147 million individuals. Primary lesson. Sometimes the most devastating cyberattacks do not begin with sophisticated malware. They begin with a known vulnerability that was never patched. Before this file is sealed, you've now followed every major piece of evidence. You know how the attackers entered. You know what they stole. You know why the breach remained hidden. And you've seen how one overlooked vulnerability became one of the largest identity theft incidents in history. But reading an investigation is not the same as solving one. Now it's your turn. Soon, you'll have the opportunity to open the official K0 investigation file for this case, where you'll step into the role of the lead investigator. You'll analyze forensic evidence, review timelines, examine security clues, and make the decisions that could have prevented or uncovered one of history's most significant data breaches. And if you want to go beyond what you've seen today, the K0 Deep Dive Analysis book explores every stage of the attack in far greater detail, including the technical failures, executive decisions, investigative findings, and cybersecurity lessons that couldn't all fit into this documentary. So here's the final question. If you had been Equifax Chief Information Security Officer, would you have stopped this attack before 147 million identities were exposed? Leave your conclusion below, because every investigator sees the evidence differently. This investigation is complete. Prepare to open the next file.